On June 26, 1975, uninvited law enforcement personnel arrived at the Pine Ridge Indian Community in South Dakota. These law enforcement personnel, including SWAT teams, attacked an American Indian movement encampment of men, women, and children. During the shootout, 2 FBI agents and 1 Native American were killed. No individual has ever been charged in connection with the death of Native American Joseph Stuntz. The Pine Ridge Indian Reservation is sacred to the Lakota people, both as a place of worship and as ancestral burial grounds. The land was deeded to the Indians by treaty in 1868, but considered worthless at that time. On that fateful day in 1975, the corrupt tribal chairman Dick Wilson was secretly negotiating away 1/8 of the mineral rights to the Department of the Interior. The FBI attack and ensuing manhunt diverted and silenced Indian resistance to the takeover. In November 1975, 4 men were indicted for the premeditated murder of 2 FBI agents. 2 of the 4 men were acquitted on the grounds of self-defense, and charges were dropped against 1 other. The 4th man, Leonard Peltier, sought asylum in Canada. He was arrested and extradited. Charges were based on 3 conflicting affidavits coerced by FBI agents from an Indian woman, Myrtle Poorbear. Leonard Peltier is a political prisoner of the U.S. government. His alleged crime, the murder of 2 FBI agents in a shootout on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1975. Charges were based on circumstantial, falsified, and coerced evidence. His real crime was defending Indian land from government and corporate land grabs. His fate is typical of Native Americans who stand up for their treaty rights and try to preserve their religion and way of life. The land he sought to defend is coveted by the federal government and energy corporations. It is rich in deposits of coal, oil, natural gas, iron ore, and uranium. If we are at all concerned about our environment, world peace, civil rights, and ultimately our nation's honor, then we all have a vital interest in the just resolution of Leonard Peltier's case.
I am Crazy Horse, leader of the Sioux, and I am very sad because the great eagle birds weep, and it is like fresh forest dying. Where today are the Pequot? Where are the Narragansett? Where are the Pocanacan?
Many once powerful tribes of our people have vanished. They have vanished before the avarice and the oppression of the white man, as snow before a summer sun.
Will we let ourselves be destroyed in our turn without a struggle? Give up our homes, our country, bequeathed to us by the Great Spirit, the graves of our dead, and everything that is dear to us. I know you will cry with me. Never, 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 never.
of a vehicle on the Pine Ridge Reservation. Appears they have some weapons. Can't tell, though. Repeat, this is Agent Williams requesting Agent Culler for backup. Request Agent Culler for backup. Over.
Got a copy, Agent Williams. Repeat your location. Over.
Heading right towards the Jumping Bull property. Repeat, onto the Jumping Bull property. The vehicle I'm chasing is directly ahead. Appears to be a few Indians in it. Got a visual on you now, Culler. The vehicle looks like it's too far ahead to catch. Need to call in backup. There's Indians on the ridge.
Up there. There's some of them. Did you call for backup? Did you radio for backup?
wanted. George said we might find some good background stuff in them.
What do you want them?
On the table will be just fine. Let's see. Here's another one named Anime Aquash. Why don't you read the basic information sheet to me while I thumb through the rest of these?
Okay. Okay. It said she died of exposure on Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. Body exhumed after foul play is suspected. A second autopsy was performed by Dr. Peterson, who discovered a small hole in the back of her head. Death determined due to a shot from a small caliber handgun. Oh my gosh!
What is it?
Here, you read it.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, it was also discovered during the second autopsy that her hands were missing. They were cut off and sent to Washington, D.C. in order to secure fingerprints.
Why would they do such a thing?
Well, Dr. Peterson reports that fingerprints could have been taken during the first autopsy, but FBI agents felt she should be embalmed immediately because of decomposition. She was buried hurriedly the first time without hands.
But what happened to her hands?
Dr. Peterson asked FBI agents to have her hands sent back in order to bury her again with all of her body parts. It's sacrilegious, according to Indian belief, to bury her incomplete. You know, it's strange there wasn't more about this in the newspapers at the time.
Here are more folders labeled Peltier.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, here's one. Gosh, this one's really thick. Look, it's got American political prisoner under his name on the tab up here. Let's see. He's serving 2 consecutive life sentences in Leavenworth Penitentiary for being associated with the deaths of 2 FBI agents on Pine Ridge Reservation on June 26, 1975. Oh, and this is interesting. This writer says that the Peltier story is one of the most alarming ever brought to the public's attention in the history of the American court system. His story still remains controversial. It's had a lot of impact on modern Indian affairs. Wonder who wrote all this stuff. They must have did a whole lot of investigation to get all this for a Fargo newspaper.
Well, this article has a byline. James Lansom. Lansom. That's familiar. I think I know who that is. If it's the same James Lansom I know, well, he's living it up in northern Michigan now.
Well, here's some more stuff on him. Let's see. Well, here's a profile on him. This says that Lansom is a member of the Ojibwa Indian Community. Peltier is a Lakota Ojibwa. Oh, and hey, look at this. A detailed chronicle of events about the Peltier case.
Wow, this reads like a drama, but it's supposed to be true.
Yeah, you know, I come up here to do some articles on the Pine Ridge Reservation, but I think there's a bigger story here.
Why, Jenny?
Because according to the stuff we've glanced at, it just may be that Peltier was given a raw deal. It all sounds a little strange to me. There was evidently a lot of publicity about the trial at the time, but I'm not so sure the real story was ever told.
But how are you going to find out any more now, after so many years?
First, I'm going to go through some more of these files. Then, I'm going to see if I can track down that Mr. Lansom. You said he was in northern Michigan?
Yeah, northern Michigan. Oh, I told my husband I'd meet him for dinner.
Okay, you go on. I'm going to stay here and go through these files.
Well, good luck.
Thanks. Bye.
Come in. Can't you see it's open?
Mr. Lanson, I'm Jenny Connors.
Yes, Miss Connors. I've been waiting on you. Your telegram came several days ago.
It's good of you to see me. I've been reading the files on the Peltier case.
Yes, your wire indicated that. The rationale was that there were differences related to evidence and that Leonard's trial was completely separate. He didn't even allow testimony about the climate of fear that existed on the reservation prior to the shooting, fear that caused the Indians to think they were being attacked. Let's go outside for a while.
Okay. Didn't I read that Judge McManus was supposed to be the federal judge presiding over the trial? Then how did Judge Benson end up with it in his courtroom in Fargo, North Dakota?
We still don't have the answer to that one. It seems as if the prosecution and the FBI were pretty upset that Rosebud and Butler were acquitted. Leonard should have been tried in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, under federal Judge McManus' jurisdiction. Looks as if the FBI just looked around until it found a judge to suit them.
Also, it was interesting the way they finally captured Leonard.
Another piece of dirty work. Leonard escaped to Canada after the shootout on the reservation, and the FBI wanted the Canadian government to hand him over. Canada said no.
And that's when they brought in Myrtle Poorbear?
Right. Canada said you can have Leonard Peltier back if and only if you can produce an eyewitness who saw him kill the two agents. And according to FBI affidavit signed by Myrtle Poorbear, she was that witness.
But after she signed, and after Leonard was convicted and brought back, Myrtle Poorbear said she did not even know Leonard Peltier, had never met him. How do you suppose the FBI managed that?
Well, I don't know everything. Just that Myrtle was very susceptible to pressure. The FBI had her in a motel room for several weeks. I imagine they used threats. You know that Anna Mae Aquas had just been found murdered on the reservation. I
read about that. It was awful. Why do you suppose she was murdered?
Nobody can prove anything, but Anna Mae was very active in the Indian movement. She had a lot of spunk and would speak up. Things were getting a little hot.
But when Myrtle Poorbear repudiated her affidavit, didn't that show everyone what the FBI was up to?
Judge Benson ruled it was inadmissible, not relevant to the case.
Then Leonard went to trial without much chance for acquittal.
Right. Judge Benson ruled that any evidence leading up to the crime, along with Myrtle Poorbear's statement that proved FBI harassment, did not pertain to Leonard's case.
You know, it's as if the prosecution carefully analyzed what influenced the earlier acquittal and got Judge Benson to rule those things inadmissible.
The crime of aiding and abetting in the two agents was no different from the charges brought against Rosebud and Butler 2 years earlier, but
the FBI wanted a scapegoat.
The real irony is that if Leonard had been tried in Cedar Rapids, Iowa with Rosebud and Butler, he would have been
acquitted along with the others.
You got it.
Well, what about any real evidence against Peltier?
Well, according to the prosecution, there was some. But the problem was Leonard's defense attorneys couldn't get access to all the FBI files. It was only after Leonard had been sentenced to Marion Penitentiary in Southern Illinois that his attorneys gained access to 8,000 pages of documentation pertaining to the American Indian movement and to Leonard Peltier. And that was only because of the Freedom of Information Act of 1981.
And you're saying any new information might have made a difference?
Would have changed the entire course of the trial.
I don't understand. What was in there that could have made a difference if Leonard was obviously set up for conviction?
Well, it's pretty complex. Maybe the best way to explain it would be to recreate the Leonard Peltier story from the Indian point of view.
Okay, let's try it. Where do we begin?
Leonard escaped to Canada after the firefight on the reservation, and the FBI had to get him back.
Oh, I know they're not above lying and cheating.
Jenny, you're right, and I'll tell you how.
Your name's Myrtle Poorbear?
Yeah.
You're a Native American?
You know that.
Tell us, Myrtle, you were there when Leonard and Collier and Williams were killed, weren't you?
No. What are you talking about? I was away with my children.
Myrtle. Listen to me, okay? You know, we all know, that this was a very, very bad thing that happened. 2 upstanding FBI agents killed in the line of duty. 3 Indians wanted for their murders. Finally, 2 Indians were captured, and 1, Leonard Peltier, escaped to Canada.
I know, I heard. I heard. Bad. So very bad. But why am I sitting here? It's all over.
Oh, no, my dear. It is not all over.
Bad. So bad.
Yes, very bad. Like my friend just said, it's not over yet. An informant saw you at the Jumping Bull's property the day of the shootout.
No, not me. I was not around. I was with my children.
Shit, Myrtle. Don't you understand? Agents Kohler and Williams lying there with their faces blown out the back of their heads, lying there in the stinking South Dakota heat, helpless.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I know nothing. I was with my children.
Damn it, Myrtle. My friend grows very impatient. You can see that, can't you? What else can we do? What else can we do? Our friends saw you there, so make it easy.
Please, not me. Not me. I was not around. I was with my children. What do you want from me?
Right, Myrtle, right. You were with your children on the Jumping Bull property that day. We know that. The informant told us that. You were there the day our men were murdered.
Please. Who said this?
Come on now. You know we can't tell you. Give away our informant's name. You must think we're stupid or something. Is that it?
Let me go. Let me be. My children have no one there. Let me go home. Lies. All lies.
You were seen. You were there. We know it. Now you just start to cooperate.
I don't know nothing. I told you, my children. What do you want from me?
Good question. Very good question. All you have to do is to admit by signing these papers that you were there with Peltier on the Jumping Bull's property.
Oh,
shit! What'd you do that for? Now I gotta clean them up!
Hey, would you just look at these pretty hands with this nice Indian jewelry decorating them? Tell us something, Myrtle. Did you know Anna Mae Aquash?
yes. What about Anna Mae?
Well, you see, your hands remind me of Anna Mae's. She had pretty hands just like yours. She even had pretty rings on her fingers just like yours. Tell us, you know all about Anna Mae's hands, don't you, Myrtle?
They cut them off.
Right, we cut them off and sent them to our fingerprinting lab in Washington, D.C. Those hands floating that jar from out of hide. Rings, pretty on her fingers.
Yeah, rings, pretty on her fingers. Just had to cut her hands off to make a positive identification. It's just too bad we had to give those hands back when we buried her the second time around.
You son of a bitches! Anna was murdered because she's an Indian activist.
Right, I know all about it. I know how you like to hang around with them damn Indian activists. That's it. I have the affidavit ready for you to sign. Now sign it!
I don't know Leonard Peltier. I never met that man.
That's all right. After you sign them papers, you can be with your children.
And you'll get to keep those nice rings.
James, you mean Myrtle Forbear did not even know Leonard Peltier?
As far as I was able to determine, absolutely not. In fact, after Leonard was caught up in Canada in a hunting shack in northern woods and extradited back to the United States, Myrtle Forbear came forward and wanted to testify at his trial that she had been coerced by the FBI into signing those affidavits.
And the judge wouldn't even listen to her?
Oh, Judge Benson heard her recount her story, but he ruled it should not be admissible evidence.
Well, you know newspaper columnist Jack Anderson, who does not even print a story unless he has hardcore facts. He printed the story on the FBI harassment and the Myrtle Forbear situation.
So, you see, the FBI got what it finally needed, an affidavit. So Canada had no choice but to hand Leonard over to the U.S. authorities. Their plan was beginning to work.
Well, what about the FBI agent who saw Leonard at the shootout?
Saw, you say? Hell, Jenny, nobody saw a damn thing. Here's what happened at Leonard's trial after he was brought back from Canada. Judge Paul Benson was the trial judge. Sinte was the prosecutor, I'm sorry. Leonard's team was composed of Ellison and Lowe. The witness was Agent Coward.
Your name is Agent Coward, and you are working with the FBI as one of their agents?
Correct, ma'am.
Would you please tell the jury and the court what you saw through your rifle scope on June 26, 1975?
I observed Leonard Peltier running from the scene of the crime. That's what I saw. I did see the defendant.
Thank you, Agent Coward. That will be all. Your witness.
Mr. Coward, you are an expert rifleman, is that correct?
Correct, sir.
And you observed the defendant, Leonard Peltier, running from the scene of the crime. Is that correct?
That's correct. I observed Leonard Peltier running through my rifle scope on June 26, 1975.
You are sure it was the defendant?
Well, I'm sure it was.
Oh, then you're not sure.
Yes, I'm sure. I positively identified the defendant.
Before or after the shooting?
Well, it was after the shooting with Agents Kohler and Williams lying there shot in the heat of the day.
You also identified Kohler and Williams lying there with your scope. It's very interesting.
Well, I didn't really identify those dead agents. You see, it was hot, and with the heat and everything.
Yes, we discovered that it was at least 110 degrees on that day. 110 degrees in the shade. Yet, you swore you saw the defendant running from the scene of the crime. Must have been 120 or even higher out in the direct sun. Ever hear of the mirage factor, Agent Coward?
Yes, of course, I've heard of the mirage factor.
Then please explain it for all of us to hear.
The mirage factor occurs because of certain climatic conditions.
Certain climatic conditions? Would you explain those conditions to us?
When the temperature reaches 90 degrees, mirages can occur at long distances.
Long distances, Agent Coward?
That's correct.
At what distance would this factor occur?
Oh, about 200 yards, maybe less.
200 yards or less. I see. Then what happens according to the mirage factor?
Well, things sort of get faded out.
Faded, meaning distorted?
Yeah, that's right, distorted. You know, out of focus.
And this happens only at very long distances under terribly hot conditions, like 110 degrees or so. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how far away were you when you identified the defendant, Leonard Peltier, running from the scene of the crime?
Quite far away, very far away. But with my scope, I spotted him.
How far,
Sir?
How far away were you on that hot day, June 1975, when the temperature was more than 110 degrees in the shade?
I was a little more than 800 yards.
800 yards? But you've just told the court that it is out of focus. People, things, out of focus, so to speak.
That's right, but I positively identified the defendant.
And you've just told the court that if the mirage factor existed 200 yards, it's next to impossible to identify anyone. And you just told the court that you were at a distance of not less than 800 yards, possibly further, if the truth were known.
I object, Your Honor. The defense keeps badgering the witness, and Agent Coward is recognized as an expert in his field.
Mr. Lowe, where are you leading us?
Agent Coward is recognized as an expert, but he's just testified that it would be virtually impossible to identify anyone at such a distance. So I move to call in a team of experts, Army marksmen, who have already tried to duplicate the conditions that existed on the day the crime was committed. We have found that it is impossible to identify anyone at such a distance.
Mr. Lowe, the court sees no reason to call in your experts when Agent Coward here is a certified expert.
Nobody disputes Agent Coward's credentials, but what harm is there in listening to other experts? What harm is there even in taking the jury right to the scene of the crime and letting them try to identify someone through a rifle scope at a distance of 800 yards away or more?
Your Honor, this trial could go on forever if we start transporting juries across the country for requests such as this.
Overruled, Mr. Lowe. Let Agent Coward's testimony stand.
And Judge Benson let Agent Coward's testimony stand. He wouldn't even allow Attorney Lowe's request to recreate the situation for the jury.
Rifle experts were called in to recreate the rifle scope sighting of men standing in the same type of heat at the same distance of 800 yards. Not one expert could identify anyone at that distance. But for some peculiar reason, Agent Coward's testimony stood up with the jury. Unbelievable, isn't it?
And Agent Coward's testimony was one of the most crucial in the conviction of Leonard.
It sure was, but there's more, much more. You remember when I wrote in my newspaper column about the FBI saying they had positively identified shell fragments at the scene of the crime as coming from Leonard's AR-15 rifle?
I remember. Agent Hodge at the ballistics lab in Washington, D.C. positively identified those fragments.
Hodge swore under oath that he identified those fragments at the scene of the crime as coming from Leonard's AR-15 rifle. That's what Hodge stated, all right.
And Lowe couldn't break his testimony at the time.
Your name is Agent Hodge, and you are a ballistics expert with the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Washington, D.C.?
That is correct.
Would you please tell the court and jury what your lab discovered and what you yourself observed regarding shell fragments found at the scene of the crime?
I discovered that the fragments found in and around the deceased were a match for, came from Leonard Peltier's AR-15 rifle.
You are positive that these shell fragments that you yourself examined came from the defendant's AR-15?
Positive.
Thank you. Your witness.
Agent Hodge, let me ask you once again. You swear, beyond a doubt, that the shell casings arrived immediately and you identified these casings personally?
Of course I examined them, and those fragments came directly from Peltier's rifle.
How do you know that the rifle you used for the test was Peltier's?
Well, Agent Cower did a visual sighting and saw Peltier with the AR-15 in his hands, running from the scene of the crime.
Oh, he did. Agent Cower visually identified the make and type of weapon Peltier was carrying at a distance of 800 yards with the mirage factor present.
That is correct. Besides, I matched the fragments with the firing pin and the weapon. And we all know Peltier often carried an AR-15 rifle.
We do we? How do we know that?
Well, eyewitnesses say he carried one, and Agent Cower believes he identified one in the hands of the man running from the crime, that man being Peltier.
And you are sure that the shell casings that arrived at the lab in Washington, D.C. were the ones that you personally examined?
Positive.
No more questions.
Very well, court recess until tomorrow morning.
James, that seems pretty bad for Leonard Peltier, especially with the last witness's testimony.
It was bad, all right. In fact, it was Agent Hodge's testimony about personal identification of those shell fragments that virtually brought in a verdict of guilty for Leonard.
But how could they really identify the rifle under those circumstances?
They couldn't.
But then...
Coward lied, Jenny, and so did Hodge, as we'll find out later. Lied as if there were no God to answer to when he swore on the good book.
But Leonard's lawyer, couldn't he do something?
Not much, I'm afraid. Not much. Anyway, Leonard's attorneys asked for more time in presenting their case, since the prosecution had took over 6 weeks in presenting theirs.
I remember that. The prosecution took over 6 weeks to present their case, but Leonard's lawyers only had 3 weeks to present theirs. What did the judge say?
Judge Benson surprised everyone by denying any more time for the defense. He said that the trial had gone on long enough, so he requested that the jury be sequestered to come up with a verdict. And we know what they brought into the courtroom.
Oh, yeah. Guilty of aiding and abetting of the murder of 2 FBI agents on Jumping Bull property on June 25th, 1975. And his sentence was?
2 consecutive life terms in prison. And since Leonard was a so-called violent Indian activist, he was sentenced to Marion Penitentiary in southern Illinois. By the way, this violent Indian activist had never been convicted of a violent crime.
Marion? That's the highest maximum security pen in this country. It's where the most violent criminals are sent.
You're telling me. Leonard sweated it out in that dungeon for over 10 years. He put up with frequent harassments and attempts on his life.
But things began to look up for him again in 1981. Isn't that when the new Freedom of Information Act went into effect?
Leonard's attorneys gained access to files that had previously been withheld from the defense and the public by the prosecution. The prosecution claimed that these files were withheld for reasons of national security.
What security?
Who knows? But those files sure shed some new light on all the lies that had been told. You see, when Leonard's attorneys gained access to those files, they discovered that
my colleague and I were given access to over 8,000 pages of previously withheld FBI files pertaining to the Peltier investigation and to the American Indian movement. What we discovered in those files was shocking.
Shocking beyond utterance. Teletypes between FBI offices in Washington and Rapid City show that the FBI performed tests that prove that the rifle Leonard allegedly used could not have shot the shells found at the site of the killing.
These documents contradict sworn testimony of FBI witnesses at the trial. Shell fragments, which Agent Hodge swore under oath that he had examined,
Were not examined by him at all.
That's correct. We discovered a memo from a trainee who was working in the FBI ballistics lab at that time.
The trainee had great difficulty in identifying which shell fragments matched what rifle, since all the shell fragments from the scene of the crime had laid in an open cardboard box in the ballistic lab for months before the trial began.
Laid in an open box with other shell casings and fragments from other crimes. Also, this same memo states that the firing pin identification could not be readily matched as coming from Leonard's AR-15 rifle.
It couldn't be matched because the AR-15 rifle that Peltier supposedly carried was damaged when it was confiscated a year after the crime.
So Agent Hodge committed perjury. A trainee, not an expert, did the ballistics testing, which Hodge told the jury he had personally performed himself.
And Hodge's testimony was the testimony that jurors later said convinced them that Leonard was guilty.
We knew we had finally discovered a terrible flaw in the state's case against Leonard Peltier.
So we asked the FBI to let us examine the remaining files pertaining to Peltier's case.
And we were refused this request.
So, the director of the FBI, former federal judge William Webster, currently director of the CIA, and federal judge Paul Benson stated that to release the remaining files would go against the security of the U.S.
But that just doesn't make sense, James.
The entire episode doesn't make sense in the context of American justice.
A shootout on a reservation, a national security threat. Had the FBI director gone mad?
Former FBI director William Webster was and still is simply covering his ass.
I'm beginning to see now. There must have been more written information or memos pertaining to the FBI files which would have...
Damaged more of the state's evidence against Leonard. Complicated, isn't it?
Complicated is right.
But then again, it's quite simple. You see, Leonard is a leader with powerful charisma. He's been compared to Martin Luther King. And he was trying to prevent the U.S. Department of Interior from negotiating away the mineral rights on the reservation to a number of powerful companies. So he was...
I see, put out of the way.
You got it.
Since 2 FBI agents were killed, even though it was in self-defense, someone had to pay.
Right.
You know, James, it's kind of hot out here.
Let's go back inside.
Okay.
Why was it that on the same day the shootout occurred, the Dakota Sioux tribal chairman, Dick Wilson, was illegally negotiating away all the tribes' uranium and mineral rights to the Department of the Interior in Washington, D.C.?
Why was it that on the day that the shootout occurred, there was army buildup, commando SWAT teams, armored personnel carriers, and helicopter gunships?
Why did American justice see fit to convict Leonard Peltier of the same crime for which it acquitted Carbondale and Butler?
Why were the 2 FBI agents, Kohler and Williams, driving unmarked police cars and not wearing police uniforms?
Why was Colonel Corbett coerced into signing false affidavits, leading to Leonard Peltier's extradition from Canada to stand trial in the United States? And why, after she recanted, did Judge Paul Benson not allow her true story in Leonard's trial as sworn testimony?
Why did FBI agent Hodge perjure himself when he identified the shell fragments as coming from Leonard Peltier's rifle?
Hodge later admitted that he had made a mistake when he allowed the trainee to examine the fragments which lay in an open box months before the trial.
Fragments which were mixed in with other shell fragments, making it impossible to prove any identification.
And why did Judge Paul Benson not allow Leonard Peltier's attorney to duplicate the mirage factor for the jury?
Why didn't he allow an FBI memo stating that its own test could not duplicate this alleged sighting? This information was withheld by the prosecution at the trial.
And why didn't Paul Judge Benson allow any of the defense's main line of evidence?
Evidence that painted an awful picture of fear and terror left on the reservation.
The fear and terror of over 100 unsolved murders on our reservation over a 15-year period.
Why did Benson refuse to admit evidence explaining why these people
James, did Leonard receive such a harsh sentence?
Well, I imagine it's what he said to the judge before the sentence. It's what his words conveyed. His words carried with them the awesome sorrow of his people, and his wishes to keep Mother Earth sacred.
I imagine Leonard knew what he had to say, or what he said, would be too much for Judge Benson to take.
Does the defendant have anything to say before sentence is passed?
I stand before you a proud man. I do not feel guilt. I have nothing to feel guilty about. American activist. Thousands of people in America, Canada, and around the world have supported me and will continue to support me to expose the injustices which have occurred in this courtroom. I feel pity for your people, that they live under such an ugly system. Under your system, you are taught greed, racism, and corruption. But most serious of all, you are taught to carry out the destruction of our Mother Earth. Under the Native American system, we are taught that all people are brothers and sisters, to share the wealth with the poor and the needy. But the most important thing we are taught is to respect and preserve the earth, which we consider to be our mother. Mother Earth gives us life from the time of our birth. And when it is time for us to leave this world, she again takes us back into her womb. But the main thing that we are taught is to preserve the earth for our children, and our children's children, and our children's children's children, because they are the next generations that will live upon her. And finally, I honestly believe that you made up your mind a long time ago that I was guilty and that you would sentence me to the maximum permitted under the law. But this does not surprise me, because you are a high-ranking member of a group which has consistently said, "In God we trust," while you went about the business of murdering my people and attempting to destroy our culture.
You profess to be an activist for your people. You are a disgrace to the Native American.
And with that, he administered the harshest punishment at his disposal. He sentenced Leonard Peltier to 2 consecutive life terms in federal prison.
So where do we stand now?
Now, with his 2 appeals to the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals ending in no new trial, Leonard can only hope for a Supreme Court hearing or a pardon.
Well, recently I've read that public support for Leonard has grown to a worldwide level so that he may receive a new trial.
This is so. He has Amnesty International backing him, the World Council of Churches backing him, and hundreds of lawmakers, congressmen, and tens of thousands of supporters backing him for a full congressional hearing.
And I've also read about Spain's honor to Leonard Peltier.
When things seemed at their worst for Leonard, out of the clear blue, William Don Carlos, the King of Spain, awarded Leonard Spain's most coveted World Peace Prize for his work with Native Americans in preventing genocide on reservations across the United States, and for his innocence of any wrongdoing for the crime of which he was convicted.
You know, James, I come out here to do a story. Instead, I found a national tragedy. Leonard Peltier, America's political prisoner.